really important topic to me as a psychologist. It's very close to my heart because as a clinical psychologist, I spend a lot of time thinking about mental health and issues related to mental health, not only here in Australia, but also on an international scale and on a global scale. So why do I think Sri Lanka needs an overhaul to its mental health care system? Sri Lanka has some really worrying mental health statistics. According to the National Directorate of Sri Lanka, over 30% of Sri Lankans experience depression or depressive episodes. In fact, depressive episodes make up a huge chunk of Sri Lanka's mental health burden. Up to 25% of kids in northern Sri Lanka display symptoms of PTSD, and 92% of children in various parts of Sri Lanka have been exposed to combat trauma. That involves blood and gore, violence, shelling, gunfire, threats to their life, or the actual threat or perceived threat to their lives, or even the witnessing of violence. Now, that is a recipe for disaster in terms of the capacity to produce PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. In some provinces of Sri Lanka, anxiety rates can be as high as 46%. That's nearly half of all people in that area struggling with symptoms of anxiety. Problematic use of substances, and by that I mean addiction to various drugs, alcohol and other types of substances, is really high in Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, the statistics are really hard to come by here because a lot of research either doesn't exist or isn't internationally available. But based on the statistics I've read, it seems like in terms of substances, not alcohol, there seems to be a high reliance on substances like heroin and marijuana. And Sri Lanka has a really high rate of intravenous substance use. Now here I must clear up a really important point. Substance use is not a moral issue. It is an issue of healthcare and mental health. And according to some of the research I read, one of the biggest obstacles to managing mental health in Sri Lanka is a moralistic view towards mental health. And finally, and this is the scariest statistic to me, Sri Lanka has one of the highest suicide rates in the entire world. In fact, Sri Lanka, being the tiny country it is actually responsible for a huge number of suicides. And that is an extremely high death toll. That means Sri Lankans are killing themselves at a vast rate. In case you're wondering, the country with the highest, or the region with the highest suicide rate is the Greenlandic territories of Denmark. Sri Lanka's suicide rate being that high is actually an indication of the fact that mental health needs to be taken seriously in that country. There are lots of reasons why mental health statistics in Sri Lanka are really poor, and I will post a follow-up video talking about why I think some of these issues might be so prevalent in Sri Lanka, including for reasons such as culture, philosophy, and lack of services. But if nothing else, the statistics I've provided today should remind you that it's very important to take your mental health very seriously. And it's very important to identify mental health outcomes, positive mental health outcomes, as an important part of a society's functioning. If you or somebody else listening to this video or watching this video has experienced difficulties with mental health, consider reaching out to somebody who is safe, or to a psychological or mental health care professional in your area.